All right, let's get right into it. Picture this. It's 1945. Berlin is nothing but rubble. Soviet soldiers are picking through the ruins of the Reich's chancery, and in a shell crater, they find a burned corpse. It's him, the man who kicked off the deadliest war in human history and masterminded the murder of millions.
But here's the thing that's so hard to wrap your head around. He wasn't born a monster. I mean, nobody is, right? He was once a kid with dreams, a young man who wanted to be an artist, even a soldier who won medals for bravery. The story here is one of a terrifying transformation.
So that's the real question, isn't it? How does a complete nobody, an insignificant man from Austria, become the architect of genocide? Well, the answer isn't some simple twist of fate. It was more like a perfect storm, a toxic mix of his own personal failures, the historical circumstances he found himself in, and, well, the absolute darkest corners of human nature.
To really get it, we have to go back to the beginning to see how that storm started to form. And the first big element? A deep well of personal resentment, born from a really messed up childhood and just spectacular, crushing failure.
You know, just look at the two extremes he grew up with. On one hand, you have his father, Alois, an authoritarian who ruled the house with an iron fist. Absolute obedience, no questions asked. Then on the other, you have his mother, Clara, who was so gentle and devoted, almost suffocatingly so. So you've got this young Adolf trapped between brutality and this desperate affection. It's no wonder he rebelled against his father's plan for him to be a boring civil servant. He had a different dream. He was going to be a great artist.
Yeah, but that dream turned out to be a total delusion. He gets to Vienna, the cultural capital of the world, full of ambition, and he gets completely crushed. He's rejected not once, but twice by the Academy of Fine Arts. His pride is just shattered, and from there he spirals. He ends up homeless, sleeping on park benches. Eventually he's living in a men's hostel, just scraping by, painting postcards for tourists. And it's there, in that pit of despair, surrounded by cheap, hateful pamphlets, that he finds a convenient scapegoat for all his failures, the Jews.
And get this for irony. In 1913, the same man who would later scream about sacrifice for the fatherland runs away from Vienna to Munich. Why? To be a draft dodger. He wanted nothing to do with serving in the diverse, multi-ethnic Austrian army.
So, okay, you've got all this personal resentment brewing. But that's just the fuel, right? It needs a spark to actually explode. And that spark was World War I, and the absolute chaos that came after it. This is where the failed artist finds a brand new stage.
For a guy like Hitler, a total drifter with no future, the war was his university. It gave the aimless nobody everything he had been craving, a purpose, a sense of belonging, and, for the very first time in his life, recognition. He was actually a brave soldier, a messenger who ran through the trenches, and he was even decorated twice. The battlefield was really the only place he ever felt like he belonged.
And then, everything changes. He's in a hospital, temporarily blinded by a British gas attack, and he hears the news. Germany has surrendered. It's over. He later claimed that in that moment of total despair, he had some kind of vision, a divine command to save Germany and restore its greatness. The failed artist had found his new, dark calling, politics, not as a public service, but as an act of revenge.
So he gets back to the chaos of post-war Munich, and he discovers this one thing he's actually amazing at: public speaking. He can hold a room captive. He joins this tiny, insignificant political group, the German Workers' Party, and with his speeches and propaganda, he completely takes it over. This all builds to a head in 1923 with the Beer Hall Putsch, which was this bungled, almost comical attempt to seize power by force. It failed, miserably. But that failure, that total public humiliation, taught him the most important lesson of his life. He's sitting in a comfy prison cell, writing his manifesto, Mein Kampf, and he has a revelation. You can't just take power with a gun anymore, not in a modern country. You have to be given power. He decided he would play their game. He'd use the ballot box. He would use democracy to destroy democracy. Now, for years, his party was a political joke. I mean, look at this chart. In 1928, they get a measly 2.6% of the vote. Nobody's taking them seriously. And then, the 1929 Wall Street crash happens, and the world economy implodes. Germany is hit harder than almost anywhere. Unemployment skyrockets. People are desperate. And that crisis? It was pure rocket fuel for the Nazis. Look at that jump. By 1932, they are the largest party in Germany.
But here's the crazy part.
Even then, he didn't have a majority. He didn't win an election outright. Power was handed to him on a silver platter. The old-school conservative elites, they were terrified of a communist revolution, and they thought Hitler was a clown they could control. So they made a fatal miscalculation. They convinced the aging President Hindenburg to make him chancellor, thinking they could use him and then toss him aside.
And boy, were they wrong. The second he got a taste of power, the mask came off. The final, horrifying stage of his transformation began, as he immediately set out to destroy the very system that had just empowered him.
I mean, just look at the speed of this. In less than 18 months, German democracy was completely dead. The Reichstag fire, Germany's parliament building, burns down, and he uses that as the perfect excuse to suspend all civil rights. Then comes the Enabling Act, which basically makes him a legal dictator. He bans every other political party, murders his own rivals within the Nazi Party during the Night of the Long Knives, and then finally merges the office of president and chancellor to become the one absolute leader, the Führer.
With total control at home, he starts looking outward, just systematically tearing up the treaty that ended World War I. He starts by testing the waters, right? He marches troops back into the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone. And when the world basically does nothing, he gets bolder. He annexes his home country of Austria. Then he takes a piece of Czechoslovakia. And every single time, the Western powers just let him do it, desperate to avoid another war. But for Hitler, war was never something to avoid. It was the entire point. His shocking deal with his archenemy, Stalin, was just the final green light he needed to invade Poland.
And we have to remember, his ultimate war was always a racial one. The Holocaust didn't start with death camps and gas chambers. It started with words. Years and years of relentless propaganda that dehumanized an entire group of people. And then it moved on to laws. The Nuremberg laws, which are mentioned here, legally separated Jews from the rest of German society. They stripped them of their citizenship, their jobs, their basic rights, making them strangers in their own home. That legal groundwork is what made all the physical violence possible.
For a while, it seemed like his military machine was unstoppable, but his whole ideology was built on overconfidence, and that led him to make a fatal mistake, invading the Soviet Union. The turning point came at Stalingrad. The number you see on the screen, 2 million. That's the estimated number of casualties from one battle. It's the bloodiest battle in all of human history, and it absolutely shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility. From that point on, it was a long, brutal road to defeat.
Which brings us to the very end, back to Berlin, to a concrete bunker deep beneath the city, as the empire he promised would last for 1,000 years came crumbling down after only 12.
And you'd think, right? At the very end, with everything he built turning to dust around him, you'd think there might be a moment of reflection, maybe some remorse. But no, absolutely nothing. His final will and testament wasn't an apology. It was one last hateful rant blaming the war on international Jewry, the very people he had tried to exterminate.
So on April 30th, 1945, with Soviet soldiers literally just a few blocks from his bunker, he took the coward's way out. He committed suicide, escaping the justice that he denied to millions upon millions of his victims. And this is the final cost. The ultimate price tag for that one man's transformation from a failed artist into a genocidal dictator. 40 million. Let that number sink in. That's roughly how many Europeans died in the war he started. And that leaves us with one last chilling thought. The man is gone, yes, but what about his methods? What about his playbook? The big lie, repeated over and over until people believe it, creating scapegoats and enemies to distract from your own failures, using the very freedoms of a democracy to tear it down from the inside. Are those methods really gone? That's the terrifying warning his story leaves for every single one of us.